A multitude of significant events have unfolded across the globe, demanding our attention. Let's delve into these developments. Here on our channel, we strive to bring you insightful analysis on economics and politics. If you value this content, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It truly helps us grow and reach a wider audience. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Let us know where you're tuning in from. They once referred to it as the Atlantic Alliance, a partnership cemented through conflict, mutual reliance, and shared defense objectives. It represented a cornerstone of post-war global stability, uniting North America and Europe under a common security umbrella. This alliance, primarily embodied by NATO, stood as a bulwark against shared threats for decades, fostering unprecedented cooperation and integration between the continents. The principles of collective defense meant that an attack on one member was considered an attack on all, a powerful deterrent that shaped international relations throughout the Cold War and beyond. But examine the situation more closely today. Fissures are becoming apparent. Strains are showing in this long-standing relationship. What were once subtle disagreements are now evolving into more pronounced divergences in strategy and outlook. The very foundation of trust, painstakingly built over generations, seems to be experiencing erosion. Why are allies with such deep historical ties suddenly creating distance from Washington? What underlying currents are causing this shift in geopolitical alignment? These aren't superficial changes. They hint at potentially profound realignments in the global order, forcing us to reconsider the future of this pivotal partnership. Why are European political figures, who once operated in lockstep with the White House, now openly challenging America's standing and influence on the international stage? This marks a significant departure from the unified front often presented in previous decades. Leaders across the continent are voicing concerns and pursuing policies that suggest a move towards greater self-reliance, questioning the dependability of the traditional transatlantic security guarantees. This questioning isn't limited to closed-door meetings. It's increasingly spilling into public discourse and policy decisions. The once unwavering solidarity appears to be fracturing under the weight of differing priorities, strategic reassessments, and perhaps a perceived shift in American focus. This emerging dynamic signals a potential transformation in European foreign policy, pushing nations to reevaluate their long-term security arrangements and their reliance on the United States as the primary guarantor of stability in the region. The implications of this growing skepticism are far-reaching, potentially reshaping alliances and power balances for years to come. It transcends mere policy discrepancies. The undercurrents are fear, deepening mistrust, and an escalating conviction that Europe must increasingly chart its own course and provide for its own security. This sentiment is not isolated to specific capitals, but is becoming a more pervasive theme across the continent. The predictability and reliability that once characterized the transatlantic relationship are being called into question, prompting European nations to explore alternatives and strengthen their own collective capabilities. This drive for self-sufficiency isn't born out of antagonism necessarily, but rather a pragmatic response to a perceived shift in global dynamics and American priorities. It reflects a growing awareness that the security landscape is evolving and that Europe may need to shoulder a greater burden for its own defense and strategic interests. From Berlin to Brussels, national leaders are recalibrating their positions and redefining their essential interests, often referred to as redrawing their red lines in international affairs. This process involves not just rhetoric, but concrete actions aimed at bolstering European defense mechanisms and reducing dependence on external powers. So, what fundamental elements have changed to precipitate this shift? Let's explore the 10 European countries that are quietly, yet unmistakably, distancing themselves from Donald Trump's potential influence in 2025, and consider the broader consequences this holds for global stability and for every nation involved. Stick with us through this analysis, as we'll provide concluding thoughts at the end of the video. Number 10. Germany. Do you ever experience that unsettling feeling when someone who has been your closest confidant for decades begins to slowly, almost imperceptibly, drift away? It's that awkward silence that hangs in the air, the delayed responses to messages that were once answered instantly, the distinct impression of receiving the cold shoulder. You sense the change, the growing distance, yet you find it difficult to pinpoint concrete evidence or confront the issue directly. It's a subtle, gradual process of disengagement that leaves you questioning the foundation of the relationship. Now, transpose that personal dynamic onto the vast stage of global politics. That is precisely the scenario unfolding with Germany's relationship with the United States. You might be astonished by the extent to which these two historically close allies have diverged. Once considered the bedrock of the US-Europe alliance, the central pillar supporting transatlantic cooperation, Germany is now actively constructing its own independent defense strategy and roadmap. This involves significant investments in domestic military capabilities and a noticeable shift towards prioritizing European-centric security frameworks. Berlin is increasingly looking inward, towards strengthening continental bonds, rather than solely relying on the traditional Washington-led security structure. This strategic reorientation includes building a defense plan, largely independent of Washington's direct input or oversight. While NATO membership remains, the underlying tone and emphasis within German strategic thinking have palpably altered. The former unwavering alignment is giving way to a more conditional partnership, where German and European interests are explicitly prioritized. In fact, in early 2025, German officials openly endorsed calls for strategic autonomy, a concept emphasizing Europe's capacity to act independently on the world stage. This push signifies a desire for a Europe that can stand firmly on its own military footing, less reliant on external security guarantees. They are also channeling billions into alternative energy partnerships, notably strengthening ties with France and China in this sector. These moves quietly sever the dependency ties that were once predominantly shared with the US, diversifying Germany's energy sources and geopolitical alignments. Why this profound shift? Because when Germany observed the US appearing to retract from its traditional global leadership roles, Berlin didn't simply stand by. They proactively began planning for a different future. They initiated steps to ensure their own security and economic resilience, anticipating a world where American engagement might be less predictable or guaranteed. You might not perceive these changes overtly on the surface, as diplomatic niceties often mask underlying shifts. However, beneath the surface, Germany has already embarked on a new trajectory, moving towards a more self-reliant and Europe-focused strategic posture. The quiet recalibration is well underway, signaling a fundamental change in one of the most critical alliances of the past century. Number 9. France. What course of action do you take when the very ground beneath your feet feels unstable, when the certainties you relied upon begin to tremble? Faced with such uncertainty, some individuals freeze, paralyzed by indecision. Others might flee, seeking refuge elsewhere. But France, historically known for its independent streak, has chosen a different path. France initiated the process of constructing its own foundation, reinforcing its capacity for independent action. While the United States navigates its own complex path through fluctuating foreign policy stances, sometimes making abrupt changes in direction, France has remained steadfast in establishing and adhering to its own set of rules and strategic priorities. Paris has consistently pursued a vision of European sovereignty, advocating for the continent to develop its own capabilities and assert its interests more forcefully on the global stage. This commitment to an independent European path has been a hallmark of French foreign policy for decades, but it has gained renewed impetus in the current climate of geopolitical uncertainty. President Macron's administration recently characterized America's approach to trade, particularly its use of tariffs, as persistent economic tremors that never stop, highlighting the disruptive impact of unpredictable U.S. policies on global economic stability. This critique reflects a broader French perspective that emphasizes the need for Europe to shield itself from external economic shocks and pursue its own trade agenda. You would naturally assume that close allies would maintain alignment on major issues, coordinating their approaches to shared challenges. But guess what? The reality is more complex. France is currently spearheading efforts to establish a distinct European defense force, an initiative aimed at enhancing the continent's military self-sufficiency. This isn't merely about reforming the existing NATO structure. It involves discussions about potentially supplanting some of NATO's traditional roles with a European-led framework, reflecting a desire for greater autonomy in security matters. In the realm of trade, France has energetically pursued new bilateral agreements, forging stronger economic partnerships with nations across Africa, as well as with major players like India and Brazil. This diversification strategy aims to reduce reliance on traditional partners and open up new markets, strengthening France's global economic footprint. In a particularly telling move in March 2025, Paris signed a substantial €12 billion technology deal explicitly designed to bypass American technological platforms entirely. This demonstrates a clear intent to foster European technological sovereignty and reduce dependence on US-dominated digital infrastructure. What is perhaps even more striking, and indicative of the shifting dynamics, is the palpable coolness and silence that now often characterizes interactions between the French and American presidents. Meetings that were once marked by visible warmth and camaraderie are now frequently described as being frostier than a winter morning in Paris, reflecting the underlying tensions and divergences in their respective strategic outlooks. Do you still believe France is simply following America's lead? Think again. The evidence points towards a nation actively forging its own path, prioritizing European interests and seeking greater independence on the world stage. Number 8. Ireland. What transpires when your most influential ally, the cornerstone of your economic and political stability, morphs into your largest source of economic uncertainty? For one small yet globally interconnected nation, this isn't merely a theoretical exercise. It represents a stark, daily reality. This predicament forces a fundamental reassessment of long-held assumptions and strategic partnerships, creating ripples of unease throughout the political and economic landscape. The nation in question must navigate a complex environment where the actions of its primary ally introduce volatility rather than predictability, demanding agile responses and a search for alternative sources of stability. We are discussing Ireland, and you would likely be taken aback by the velocity at which circumstances are evolving for this island nation. This is a country whose economic model became profoundly reliant on trade with the United States, particularly within the critical sectors of pharmaceuticals and technology. These industries form the backbone of the Irish economy, attracting significant foreign investment, primarily from American corporations, and generating substantial export revenue. Consequently, any tremor originating from Washington, whether a policy shift, economic downturn, or trade dispute, inevitably sends significant ripples across the Irish Sea, impacting Dublin's economic prospects and strategic calculations. However, the year 2025 is painting a starkly different picture from the past. Following President Trump's announcement of another potential wave of global tariffs, this time specifically menacing the vital pharmaceutical industry, Ireland did not succumb to panic. Instead, it initiated a strategic pivot. Recognizing the vulnerability created by overdependence, Dublin didn't wait for the potential economic storm to hit. With over €100 billion in pharmaceutical exports potentially at stake, a figure highlighting the sector's immense importance, Irish officials immediately activated back-channel communications. They engaged in quiet, intensive discussions with European Union partners and explored opportunities in burgeoning Asian markets, seeking to diversify trade relationships and mitigate the risks associated with American economic policy shifts. These discrete conversations are steadily evolving into tangible realignments. Why? Because when you come to the realization that the very engine of your national economy could become the next target in a global trade conflict, you don't passively await the lightning strike. You take proactive measures. But perhaps what's even more surprising is the shift in public sentiment. Irish citizens, who have traditionally held overwhelmingly pro-American views, are now beginning to question the long-term viability and reliability of this historical friendship. Recent polls indicate a notable 14% decline in favorable views toward U.S. leadership since January 2025. That isn't just a minor dip. It serves as a significant warning sign, reflecting a growing unease among the populace about the direction of the transatlantic relationship. And this shift isn't confined solely to trade concerns. Cooperation in the realm of defense is also undergoing a transformation. While Ireland maintains its traditional policy of military neutrality, and is not a NATO member, it has markedly increased its collaboration with European Union security initiatives. This move signals a clear intention to build resilience from within the European framework, rather than looking primarily across the Atlantic. The trust in American diplomatic predictability, once a given, has clearly suffered a blow. And once that trust begins to erode, nations, like individuals, start reinforcing their own defenses, metaphorically locking their own doors at night. Still under the impression that Ireland is simply leaning on America? They aren't just leaning. They are actively learning and adapting, charting a new course in response to the changing geopolitical tides. Number 7. Portugal. When the gales of uncertainty begin to howl across the international landscape, nations react differently. Some scramble for the nearest available shelter, seeking protection under the umbrella of larger powers. But others, demonstrating resilience and foresight, begin constructing their own lighthouses, beacons to navigate the turbulent waters independently. This latter approach precisely describes the path Portugal is now charting. You might not initially associate Portugal with major shifts in global alignment, but you may not believe how quietly and deliberately it has begun to step out from under the long shadow cast by the United States. This strategic repositioning reflects a broader European trend, but Portugal's execution is notable for its subtlety and focus. In early 2025, Portuguese defense officials took analysts by surprise. They publicly announced they were seriously considering the acquisition of European-manufactured fighter jets, potentially favoring them over the established American F-35 program. This move sent shockwaves through defense circles because it wasn't primarily driven by cost considerations. Instead, the decision was rooted in confidence, or rather, a lack thereof. It signaled declining confidence in the long-term reliability and strategic alignment of depending solely on U.S. military hardware, and reflected a growing desire to invest in European defense capabilities. This decision embodies a broader aspiration, building a future less intrinsically tied to Washington's shifting political winds and policy positions. Portugal has always placed a high value on diplomacy and maintained strong transatlantic cooperation. Lisbon has historically been a reliable partner within NATO and has cultivated close ties with the U.S. However, in recent months, even Portugal's characteristic patience appears to be wearing thin. The country is actively recalibrating its foreign policy, placing a greater emphasis on strengthening southern alliances. Renewed trade talks are underway across Africa and Latin America, regions the U.S. hasn't consistently prioritized in recent years. This focus reflects a strategic diversification, seeking new partnerships and economic opportunities beyond the traditional transatlantic axis. Furthermore, consider Portugal's new Tech Innovation Fund, a significant initiative worth over €2.5 billion. This fund is specifically directing investment towards projects that deliberately avoid dependence on American technology platforms. Development is focusing on cloud systems, artificial intelligence integration, and even green infrastructure projects designed to operate effectively without needing a made-in-USA component or relying on American-controlled digital ecosystems. But what might be the most startling aspect of this shift? Much of it is occurring discreetly, without fanfare or major headlines. These are quiet exits from previous dependencies, subtle realignments happening behind the scenes. It's akin to a guest quietly slipping away from a party before the atmosphere becomes strained or awkward. Think Portugal is merely following the lead of larger European nations? No. Lisbon is actively charting its own course, drawing its own map for navigating the complexities of the 21st century global order. Number 6. Switzerland. You recognize that a fundamental shift is occurring when even the most famously neutral player on the world stage begins, however subtly, to choose a side. For decades, Switzerland meticulously cultivated an image of impartiality, carefully positioning itself between the world's major powers. It sat quietly, focusing its energies on international banking, skilled diplomacy, and steadfastly remaining outside global conflicts and political entanglements. Its neutrality was not just policy, it was a core part of its national identity and its successful economic model, making it a trusted hub for international organizations and finance. However, in the year 2025, that long-held silence was decisively broken. Switzerland delivered a firm no to a proposed free trade agreement with the United States. This rejection wasn't a minor diplomatic hiccup, it was a significant statement. Why the refusal? Because Swiss lawmakers, particularly those aligned with the Social Democratic Party, expressed a growing belief that the United States was employing economic pressure tactics, like the threat or imposition of tariffs, as a means to divide European nations. They perceived the proposed agreement not just through an economic lens, but as a strategic maneuver that could undermine European cohesion, a principle Switzerland increasingly sees as vital to its own long-term interests. This perspective is not mere speculation. It is explicitly documented within Swiss parliamentary debates. In February, a key parliamentary committee directly cited the potential return of aggressive U.S. trade policies under a figure like Trump as a tangible threat to European unity, and consequently, froze negotiations on the free trade deal. Contemplate the significance of this action. A nation renowned for its neutrality, rejecting potentially beneficial economic ties, not primarily due to economic factors, but because of strategic concerns about the political motivations and potential consequences of aligning too closely with an unpredictable superpower. But what perhaps offers even more compelling evidence of this shift? Switzerland isn't merely opting out of certain US-led initiatives, it is actively opting in towards closer integration with Europe. For the first time in many years, Bern is forcefully pushing forward with measures aimed at achieving tighter economic harmonization with the European Union. This includes revisiting complex negotiations around aligning Swiss digital standards with established European frameworks, deliberately choosing European models over American systems. And this transformation extends beyond policy into the realm of public opinion. Polls conducted in early 2025 revealed that a remarkable 68% of Swiss citizens now support closer cooperation with the EU bloc. This represents a substantial increase compared to previous years, indicating a significant shift in public sentiment away from strict neutrality and towards embracing a more European-oriented future. The trust that once served as a cushion for US-Swiss economic diplomacy is undeniably eroding, and this erosion isn't being easily repaired. You might assume a neutral country would avoid making waves, but Switzerland's traditional silence on such matters, it appears to be over. The nation is subtly, yet clearly, recalibrating its position on the global stage. Number 5. Belgium. Occasionally, the very heart of Europe begins to pulsate to an unfamiliar rhythm, a new beat that signals underlying change. And if you fail to listen intently, tuning out the subtle shifts in tempo and tone, you risk missing the crucial warning signs of a larger transformation. The political and economic currents are shifting, and complacency can lead to being caught unprepared by significant realignments. Take a closer look at Belgium. This nation is far more than just another European country. It occupies a unique and central position in the continent's architecture. Brussels is not only the de facto capital of the European Union, but also hosts the headquarters of NATO, making it the epicenter of countless critical EU operations and the nerve center of the Transatlantic Security Alliance. Historically, Belgium has been a staunch believer in and a firm pillar of the Transatlantic Alliance, deeply invested in the partnership between Europe and North America. Its strategic location and institutional importance have made it a key player in fostering cooperation across the Atlantic. However, in the year 2025, that foundational belief is being subjected to unprecedented tests. The certainties of the past are giving way to new questions and concerns. In January, Belgian leaders voiced explicit, open concern regarding whether the United States would continue to serve as a reliable guarantor of European defense. This public questioning of American commitment, emanating from the very heart of NATO, was a significant departure from previous diplomatic norms. It wasn't just carefully worded diplomatic language. It was the expression of a country actively preparing for the possibility that long-standing security alliances might no longer hold the same unwavering certainty. These leaders are contemplating scenarios where the guarantees that underpinned European security for decades could become conditional or even absent. Behind closed doors, Belgian officials have been proactively exploring avenues to shift more of their defense infrastructure and planning under EU-led initiatives. This involves seeking greater integration within European defense frameworks and reducing reliance on purely transatlantic structures without necessarily waiting for Washington's next policy directive or strategic shift. And the reasons for this extend deeper than just security concerns. Belgium's economy is intricately linked with international trade, and particularly thrives on its commercial relationship with the U.S., especially in sectors like chemicals and aerospace. These industries are vital to Belgian prosperity. Yet since the most recent threats of U.S. tariffs emerged, impacting key European sectors, Belgian exporters have begun a subtle but significant process of rerouting their logistics chains. They are increasingly looking towards markets in Asia and the Middle East, diversifying their trade dependencies and mitigating the risks associated with potential transatlantic trade friction. These are quiet maneuvers, but they carry substantial impact. Internal polling conducted in March 2025 reveals a startling statistic. Only 39% of Belgians still believe the U.S. will consistently support Europe's defense over the next decade. That represents a steep decline from just 3 years prior, a clear indicator of eroding public confidence. This isn't about hostility, it's about realism. When the very foundations you rely upon begin to show signs of instability, even the most loyal partners start evaluating their emergency exits and contingency plans. Still convinced Belgium is firmly anchored in the traditional transatlantic dream? Not anymore. Number 4. Denmark. Some nations amplify their voices, making loud pronouncements when geopolitical tensions escalate. Others, however, choose a different path. They make their moves in silence, their actions speaking volumes while leaving others to decipher the implications. Their quiet adjustments can often signal profound shifts beneath the surface of international relations. But lately, one small Scandinavian nation has transitioned from quiet observation to decisive action. That country is Denmark. And you might be genuinely surprised by the extent to which it is willing to deviate from previous norms in 2025, actively building its future with a reduced emphasis on the American sphere of influence. Just last month, Danish officials put forth a sweeping new policy proposal aimed at significantly increasing national defense spending by 1.2% of GDP. On the surface, this might seem like a move in line with broader NATO expectations. But here lies the crucial twist. None of this increased funding is earmarked for U.S.-led defense initiatives or programs. Instead, these substantial resources are being channeled directly into joint Nordic defense collaborations and EU-led strategic operations. This deliberate allocation signifies a clear shift in priorities, favoring regional and European frameworks over traditional reliance on American leadership in security matters. What precipitated this change? It boils down to consistency, or the perceived lack thereof. After experiencing years of unpredictable policy shifts emanating from Washington, affecting critical areas like climate agreements, international trade rules, and collective defense commitments, Copenhagen has begun to fundamentally doubt whether long-term alignment with the U.S. remains a reliably safe bet. The Danish government is increasingly concluding that relying solely on American predictability carries significant risks. Consequently, Denmark has started looking inward towards its Nordic neighbors and westward towards strengthening the EU's strategic capabilities. And it doesn't end with traditional defense spending. In March 2025, Denmark surprised many observers by fast-tracking a major AI infrastructure bill. This legislation is specifically designed to foster partnerships with European and Asian technology ecosystems, deliberately bypassing traditional American tech giants like Google Cloud and AWS. This isn't merely a technological preference. It's a strategic statement about diversifying digital dependencies and fostering technological sovereignty closer to home. But perhaps the most telling indicator comes from the Danish people themselves. Recent surveys reveal that only 42% of Danes now trust the United States to consistently protect European interests. This figure represents the lowest level of trust recorded since 2003. Consider that statistic. A nation historically aligned with the U.S., now showing such diminished confidence in American commitment to shared European security. A country that once leaned heavily into the transatlantic relationship is now demonstrably looking inward to its region and westward to Brussels for its future security and technological partnerships. So the next time someone suggests Denmark is simply playing it safe within existing structures, remind them, safety in 2025 looks considerably different, and Copenhagen is actively, if quietly, forging a new path based on perceived European and regional necessities. Number 3. Estonia. When your immediate neighbor is a global superpower with a documented history of aggressive actions, your foreign policy isn't about playing political games. It's fundamentally about ensuring survival. Every decision is weighed against the potential existential threat, demanding a constant state of vigilance and strategic adaptation. You don't engage in abstract political maneuvering. You focus on practical measures for self-preservation. This is the defining mindset of a nation that has, out of necessity, become one of the most strategically alert and proactive countries in Europe. We are talking about Estonia. But guess what? Even in this frontline state, traditionally one of the most steadfast supporters of American engagement, trust in the United States isn't what it once was. Estonia has long been among the most vocally pro-American voices in Eastern Europe, especially concerning defense matters. It has consistently advocated for a strong U.S. military presence on the continent and actively participated in NATO exercises. Its commitment to the transatlantic alliance has been unwavering, born from a deep understanding of the security challenges in its region. However, in 2025, a subtle but significant shift is underway, rooted in a pragmatic fear about the future reliability of its key ally. Estonian leaders recently initiated programs to significantly boost local defense production capabilities. This move isn't solely about achieving self-reliance for its own sake. It's driven by a concern, explicitly stated in their own internal documents, that Washington's reliability as a security partner can no longer be guaranteed. That exact phrasing comes directly from a classified Estonian National Security Committee memo that was leaked in February. Think about the weight of those words coming from such a historically pro-American nation. You would be shocked at the bluntness of the assessment. And here's where the shift becomes even more tangible. Estonia is actively working behind the scenes with its regional partners, Finland, Latvia, and Poland, to establish a Baltic-led rapid response force. This force is being specifically designed to operate effectively, with or without direct NATO or U.S. support, creating an independent layer of regional security. That's not merely a backup plan. It represents the creation of an entirely new playbook for regional defense, acknowledging the potential need to act autonomously. Technologically, Estonia is also making quiet moves to distance itself from reliance on U.S. platforms. The country recently finalized a significant cyber defense agreement with Japan and Germany, creating what one analyst described as a firewall without a U.S. plug. For a nation that has previously suffered massive cyber attacks, this focus on diversifying its cybersecurity partnerships isn't symbolic. It's a matter of national survival. But perhaps the most surprising element is the shift in public opinion. In a country where pro-American sentiment has historically been exceptionally high, recent data shows that public support for full U.S. military dependency has dropped by 19% just since the beginning of the year. The Estonian people aren't turning hostile towards the U.S. They are becoming increasingly cautious. Estonia continues to value its friendship with the United States, but in 2025, that friendship is now accompanied by a robust Plan B, built on regional cooperation and enhanced self-sufficiency. Number 2. Poland. There exists a critical distinction between standing alongside a partner in solidarity and finding yourself standing alone when that partner fails to materialize. It's the difference between mutual support and unilateral vulnerability. In the geopolitical landscape of 2025, one of America's historically closest and most strategically vital allies is beginning to seriously question this very difference, pondering the implications of potential American unreliability. That country is Poland. For years, Poland has been arguably one of the most fervent supporters of a strong U.S. military presence in Europe, often acting as a key linchpin for NATO's eastern flank. Its commitment has been demonstrated through substantial investments in defense, hosting thousands of American troops, publicly praising NATO cooperation, and even naming military installations in honor of past U.S. presidents, signifying deep historical ties. Warsaw's foreign policy has been heavily predicated on the assumption of unwavering American support. However, lately the tone emanating from Warsaw has discernibly changed. Behind the continued expressions of loyalty, there is a rising current of urgency and a quiet, yet palpable frustration. Polish leaders have observed the same shifts in U.S. policy predictability that have unsettled other European capitals. In early 2025, demonstrating a clear move towards greater self-sufficiency, Polish leaders approved a massive €14 billion expansion of domestic weapons manufacturing. This significant investment aims to bolster Poland's own defense industrial base, signaling a strategy of doubling down on independence rather than solely relying on external suppliers, including the U.S. You would be shocked to hear the term insiders are using to describe this strategy: strategic insurance, an explicit hedge against the possibility that Washington might disengage or become a less reliable partner in the future. This isn't just about enhancing defense capabilities. It's about preparing for potential silence or absence on the other end of the transatlantic line. Even in the crucial area of trade and energy, Poland is actively stepping away from overdependence. New energy agreements were signed with Norway and South Korea this year, diversifying supply chains previously dominated by other partners. This represents a long-term strategic pivot towards a broader range of security and economic partnerships, reducing vulnerability to shifts in policy from any single ally. And what about the Polish people? Polls conducted in April 2025 indicate a significant shift in public mindset. While a majority, 65%, still value relations with the U.S., nearly half of the population now believes that Europe should prepare for a future where American support is either unreliable or entirely absent. This represents a stunning change in public perception for one of Washington's staunchest historical allies. Poland hasn't severed its ties with the U.S., but it's no longer clinging to them unquestioningly. It's actively building something stronger and more self-reliant, grounded in regional partnerships and domestic capacity. The unquestioning faith in the transatlantic bond is being replaced by a more pragmatic and cautious approach. Number 1. United Kingdom. What do you do when your oldest, most steadfast partner, the one with whom you share the deepest historical, cultural, and strategic ties, begins to operate by a constantly changing set of rules? When predictability erodes and reliability becomes uncertain, what's the next move? For one major global power, the answer is becoming increasingly clear, though perhaps subtly executed. You start writing your own rulebook, quietly forging new paths while maintaining outward appearances of continuity. That country is the United Kingdom, and you might be genuinely shocked by how quietly, yet significantly, it is altering its global playbook in 2025, navigating a complex world with a new degree of strategic independence. This is a nation that for generations proudly touted the special relationship with the United States, a bond seemingly forged in shared history and common purpose. From world wars to the Cold War and beyond, London and Washington often acted in concert on the global stage. But this year, that familiar phrase, the special relationship, is notably less prominent in political discourse. Why the shift? Because after the strategic recalibration necessitated by Brexit, after enduring years of fluctuating U.S. foreign policy stances under different administrations, and facing mounting uncertainty about the long-term future and commitment levels within NATO itself, Britain is pragmatically hedging its bets. London is seeking a more diversified portfolio of international partnerships. In March, the UK took a significant step by launching the AUK-5 Economic Alliance. This initiative focuses on financial and technological cooperation with Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Japan. Notice who isn't leading or even centrally featured in this new grouping: the United States. While presented as complementary to existing structures, its formation signals a clear British intent to build influential networks independent of Washington's direct leadership. That's not just a minor policy adjustment. It represents a fundamental directional shift in Britain's global engagement strategy. Meanwhile, the UK's own Defence White Paper, released earlier this year, outlines a strategic posture that includes a reduced dependence on US military logistics. Instead, it emphasizes expanded Indo-Pacific deployments and collaborations, reflecting a geographic rebalancing of British strategic focus. British intelligence agencies are concurrently investing in building new, secure communication and data systems that no longer automatically default to American-based infrastructure, aiming for greater operational sovereignty. But perhaps the most telling indicator is the sentiment among the British public. In a recent survey, only 38% of Britons expressed trust that the current U.S. administration would act in Britain's best interests. For a country that has stood shoulder to shoulder with America through nearly every major 21st century conflict, that figure represents a truly stunning decline in emotional and political connection. The UK isn't severing ties with Washington, but it's demonstrably not looking backward with nostalgia either. It is stepping forward onto its own path, navigating a changing world with a renewed focus on diverse partnerships and national interests. Europe is changing, quietly, strategically, and more rapidly than many realize. From Ireland to the UK, Germany to Estonia, nations once tightly bound to Washington are now constructing their own futures, sometimes alongside the US, and sometimes charting a completely different course. So, what does this gradual but undeniable distancing signify for the established balance of power? What are the implications for global alliances that have defined the international order for decades? And how might this reconfiguration impact the world's response to the next major international crisis? We are witnessing these profound shifts unfold in real time, a quiet but potentially revolutionary transformation of the geopolitical landscape. If you found these insights into Europe's strategic recalibration valuable, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis, and share this with anyone who still perceives global alliances as immutable fixtures. Because the reality is, they are not set in stone. And trust us, this complex and evolving story, it is only just beginning to unfold. Stay tuned for our concluding thoughts. The concluding analysis suggests that the traditional bedrock of the Atlantic Alliance is undergoing a significant transformation. The 10 countries highlighted, representing a diverse cross-section of Europe, are exhibiting varying degrees of strategic divergence from the United States. This isn't necessarily a unified anti-American bloc, but rather a collection of individual national responses to a perceived increase in U.S. policy unpredictability, a potential decline in American focus on European security, and a growing desire for greater European strategic autonomy. Factors driving this include lingering impacts of Trump-era policies, concerns about a potential return to similar approaches, the economic consequences of trade disputes and tariffs, shifting energy dynamics, and the overarching need for greater self-reliance in an increasingly multipolar world. Nations like France and Germany appear to be actively leading the charge towards a more independent European defense and economic posture. Others, like Poland and Estonia, while remaining committed NATO allies, are clearly hedging their bets by strengthening regional cooperation and domestic capabilities as a form of strategic insurance. Even historically neutral nations like Switzerland and non-NATO members like Ireland and Denmark are recalibrating, prioritizing EU integration, and diversifying partnerships away from U.S. dependence. Public opinion across these nations also reflects a decline in trust regarding American reliability. The long-term implications are profound. A potentially weakened NATO, a more assertive and perhaps fragmented European Union pursuing its own strategic agenda, and a fundamentally altered transatlantic relationship. The special relationship and unwavering alliances of the past are being replaced by more conditional, interest-based partnerships. This shift necessitates a re-evaluation of global power dynamics and suggests that future international cooperation on major crises may require navigating a more complex web of regional and national interests, rather than relying solely on the traditional U.S.-led framework. The era of unquestioned American leadership within the Western Alliance appears to be evolving, forcing Europe to define and pursue its own destiny with greater independence.